Listen up. Lieutenant Connor Hale's voice cracked through the humid air of the Joint Amphibious Combat Center, Trident Hall, like a whip. Bare bulbs buzzed overhead. Sweat, rubber, and disinfectant braided into a single sour thread that lived in the blue mats and cinderblock walls. "This is my mat," he said, pacing the circle of sailors. "On my mat, you're a liability until you prove otherwise. And right now, all I see—" He halted, chin tilting toward the slight figure at center. "Is someone who's going to get a real operator hurt. Clear?" The nervous chuckles came on cue. Chief Petty Officer Aria Vale said nothing. She stood where he'd planted her, hands loose at her sides, boots set as if the floor itself had chosen them. Her uniform was sun-faded and immaculate. She was average height, compact, unremarkable in all the ways that make a person vanish in a chow line. Except for the way she didn't blink. Except for the way her weight rested through the edges of her feet, like a structure designed rather than born. From the shadow of the roll-up bay door, Command Master Chief Raul Alvarez watched. 30 years on the water had taught him the posture of problem solvers. Their stillness rang louder than barked orders. Vale had it. The lieutenant didn't see it. Gatekeepers rarely do. "If you believe strength is built on action and not excuses," Hale boomed to the ring of trainees, "pay attention. We're demonstrating a dominant frame pin and escape against a larger opponent. Spoiler, biology wins." He turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Chief Vale, be useful." He grabbed her wrist too hard. The circle leaned in. "The attacker establishes weight here," Hale said, ratcheting her arm across his chest to crank torque where it hurts. "He can strike, choke, transition, finish. The defender," his pitying glance grazed her face, "has very few options. Textbooks lie. Reality isn't kind to smaller frames." The crowd made the same sound young crowds always make when the authority confirms their laziness. A low, relieved hum. Vale's breath didn't change. If she'd been a metronome, the room could have drilled to her cadence. Hale repeated the lecture, this time with theater. His free hand cut toward her face in a slow arc, the almost slap instructors use to dramatize chaos. He stopped inches short. She shifted just enough that his fingers met empty air. No drama, no flinch. The smallest move in the world. Irritation flashed behind his eyes. "On the battlefield," he said, louder now, "nobody pulls a punch." He didn't pull this one. The open palm cracked against Vale's jaw with a bright, awful sound that flattened the gym into silence. A few trainees exhaled like tires. One of them swore under his breath, too soft to count as courage. Hale froze with his hand in the air, waiting for the proof he'd ordered from the universe. Recoil, tears, apology. Vale's head had barely moved. What came next wasn't anger. It was arithmetic doing what arithmetic does once you stop arguing with it. Her captured hand rotated a quarter turn and vanished from his grip. The thumb bit a tendon high on his wrist. His fingers opened like a failed parachute. Her other hand snapped a blade of knuckles into the braid of nerves below his ear. His dominant arm died past the elbow, flopping heavy against his side. She stepped into him, not away, hip sliding across his line like a hinge, and the ground changed sides without warning. He didn't crash. She placed him, flat, breath displaced, her knee pinning his live arm, forearm gentle but absolute across his windpipe. 2 seconds, maybe less. The gym made no sound at all. Hale stared up at the ceiling with eyes unfamiliar to him, an animal's eyes, cold with recognition. Above him, Vale's face had not changed. No triumph, no heat, only a technician concluding a task. "Chief," the voice from the bay door cut cleanly through the quiet. "On your feet." She flowed off the lieutenant and stood. Hale lurched up after her, mouth opening to reconstruct the world with words. Alvarez was already walking in, the room aligning itself around him the way harbors line themselves around a tide. He didn't look at Hale. He looked at the red print seeding on Vale's jaw. He looked at the sailors, every one of them holding themselves too still, like witnesses who understood they were witnesses. Then he looked at Vale's stance the way a craftsman eyes a joinery cut he didn't teach. "What's your name, Chief?" he asked quietly. Vale, Master Chief. Alvarez nodded once. Spell it. She did. He lifted a finger. A young yeoman hustled a ruggedized tablet into his hand. Alvarez's thumbprint and iris check unlocked more doors than most knew existed. The tablet chimed. He read. The only sound in Trident Hall was the fans. When he looked up, the respect in his eyes was not theatrical. It was the kind that makes rooms smaller. For those of you, he said mildly, who confuse collar brass with competence, let me correct the record. He didn't look at Hale. He spoke to the circle, to the mat, to the institution. Name? Vale, Aria T. Current Billet. Fleet Training Command, attached. Prior. Maritime Special Projects Unit, Detachment Echo. Classification, Tier 1. Deployments, 7. Theaters. He glanced at the line that replaced continents with redacted black. Classified. Qualifications. Advanced CQC Instructor. Covert Entry Specialist. Master Breacher. Maritime Interdiction Lead. Language, Farsi. Native, Designator. He let the last word find the air. Ghostwatch. Nobody breathed. Alvarez closed the cover of the tablet as if it were a book. Then the Command Master Chief, who had saluted admirals and buried friends and forgotten more than the rest would ever know, came to attention so crisp the air cracked, and he raised his hand to his brow. Chief Vale, he said, on behalf of this command, my apologies for the conduct of my officer. Thank you for your demonstration. The room's gravity inverted. Hierarchy was revealed for what it is at its best. A structure built to recognize value, not hide from it. Hale was vapor. News doesn't run here. It sinks, then it moves like pressure underwater. By evening, every passageway on base had a version of the story. In some tellings, Vale disarmed 3 men. In others, she did it blindfolded. The facts that mattered were simpler. A quiet sailor took a slap and answered with geometry. A Master Chief read a file and saluted. Hale didn't show for morning PT. The official email said, reassignment to OPNAV staff, special projects. The chief smiled without humor. Everyone knows the geography of exile. Coronado to cubicles is a longer trip than it looks on a map. Trident Hall's syllabus changed. A module appeared between ground control and clinch work. Module 7B. Asymmetric grappling. Leverage against mass. The instructors called it that in paperwork. On the mats, it had one name, the Vale Counter. Someone, nobody ever knew who, took a fine-tip Sharpie and inked a small 5-point star where Hale's head had rested. It was the tiniest memorial and the largest. New classes formed their first circle around it. A senior petty officer would tap his boot on the star and say, right here is where a bad idea ended. The kids stood a little straighter. Vale didn't change. Myth swirled. She did laundry. She showed up early. She wrapped her thumbs before pull-ups. She cleaned her sidearm like prayer. When sailors went quiet in chow as she sat, she blinked in faint confusion, checked if there was something on her sleeve, then ate. A seaman barely out of high school cornered her by the squat rack. Chief, Vale, he stammered. I saw. That was the most... It was leverage, she said, dropping from the bar. He extended. I redirected. The technique works. He blinked, hungry for legend, handed instruction instead. She toweled her hands and nodded toward the mats. Don't build stories about people. Build habits. Those stay. He carried that sentence longer than the tale. The star on the mat baked into ritual. Chiefs who hadn't been there told it like they had, and the story still taught true. A grizzled gunner's mate with a voice like sandpaper would face a semicircle of kids with fresh haircuts and say, the deadliest person in the room is the one who stopped needing you to know it. Then he'd point at the star. Respect first, assumptions last. Respect changed hands faster after that. Lieutenants asked chiefs real questions and listened to old answers. The slow, sideways cruelty that sometimes collects like algae in tight places. The bottle knocked from a tray, the lazy nickname, the joke with no punchline, found less oxygen. It still sprouted. People are people. But more often it died quiet deaths when a bystander coughed and said, cut it out, like it was the weather. like decency was normal. That was Vale's work more than the takedown. A single clean cut heals. Culture shifts when the cut gets cleaned every day. She did not teach Module 7B. Officially, she wasn't assigned to combatives. Unofficially, instructors knocked on her office door with hypothetical edge cases and left with new drills. She corrected posture with 2 fingers. She could tilt a pelvis 6 millimeters and transform a body from sandbag to spring. "Drop your ribs," she'd say, tapping 3 places. "Now breathe into that space." The trainee would suddenly find the floor. It offended nobody that she never raised her voice. Instruction falls differently when the teacher has proved she doesn't need you to believe her. Weeks later, during a corridor lull that arrives like a tide between evolutions, Alvarez stopped beside her at a bulletin board littered with schedules. They stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 quiet people observing the theater of paperwork. "You didn't file," he said without looking at her. "For what, Master Chief?" "Incident report." "There wasn't an incident," she said. "There was instruction. It just arrived out of sequence." He almost smiled. "Your jaw okay?" "Fine." "That mark," he said, chin tipping toward the star on the mat, "isn't for you." "I know." "It's for the next idiot," he offered. "It's for the next room," she said. "So it remembers itself." He nodded. "Ghostwatch," he said, as if tasting whether the word still meant the same thing. "Haven't seen that designator in a long time." "Neither have I," she said, and that was all. He didn't ask the story behind the redactions. Professionals recognize fences. Every base collects a ghost. This one collected hers. Sailors told the Vale story with addenda that said more about their needs than her. In one version, she had been recruited out of a forgotten valley after disarming 3 men with a spoon. In another, she had spent 2 winters entirely underwater and returned knowing how long a lung can be brave. Alvarez never corrected them. He just started class on time. What survived the edits was a kind of liturgy. New officers sat in the back row with open notebooks and shut mouths. Chiefs spoke once where they used to bark twice. The star gleamed faintly under scuffs. A pair of midshipmen on summer cruise found the courage to ask an ensign if the story was real. The young officer, blue-eyed, exhausted, newly converted, shrugged. "Real enough to help," he said. "Which is the kind that matters." Hale's name hardened into a warning embedded in jargon. "Don't hail yourself," a chief would mutter when a junior's tone sharpened toward brittle. It worked as well as any safety brief. On the day everything really ended, nobody knew it was a day at all. The gym was empty but for Vale and a mop bucket. She preferred cleaning her own floor. It quieted the body. The bucket sloshed. The star shone darker under the damp. "Chief Vale," a voice called gently from the doorway. Captain Lin Song stood there, operations officer for the whole compound, a woman with the gaze of someone who filed facts where feelings tried to live. Beside her, a man in plain clothes leaned lightly against the jamb, hands empty, posture unreadable in a way only 3 kinds of people achieve: monks, liars, and operators. His jaw bore the map of an old break. His eyes carried distances. "Ma'am," Vale said, setting the mop. "Aria," the man said, and the small breach of formality threaded a seam through the air. "Ethan," she answered, like a person picking up a sentence from 5 years ago. Song's chin ticked. "We'll keep this short." 3 sentences later, the room learned what rooms sometimes learn. That some people leave because they are done, and some leave because their work is elsewhere now. The particulars were classified, which is a kind way to say the details would put the wrong pictures in too many heads. Vale signed what she had to sign, rolled the mop bucket back to the closet, and set the handle carefully in its clip. She could have left without looking down. She looked down anyway. She pressed the toe of her boot against the little star to nudge a bubble of mop water off its edge. "Keep it small," she said to nobody, to everybody. "Always," Song said. Alvarez met her at the bay door. He didn't salute. Neither did she. They shook hands like carpenters who admire the same seam. "Don't be a stranger," he said. "I'll be a ghost," she said, and for once she smiled. Years pass faster on bases than off. Belts change. Logos rebrand. Gyms get new LED lights that buzz less. The star faded, then someone retraced it the same size, the same hesitating line, as if imitation were prayer. Classes still formed the morning circle. Chiefs still told the story. Young sailors ran fingers over the ink with the private gratitude of people who needed proof the world could be fair on Tuesdays at 0600. Somebody added a sentence near the end. After the lesson about leverage and assumptions and silence, after the warning about rank and ego and the cost of sloppiness, a senior instructor would nod toward the star and say, "Legacy isn't a statue. It's a standard." Then he'd tap the mat. "Hold it." The room would breathe together. The drill would begin. Far from Coronado, a door no trainee would ever see cycled open on a windless night. Two figures moved like punctuation through a building that had thought itself a blank page. Somewhere inside, a bad idea ended before it grew teeth. No statues, no hashtags. Just a message from a hand nobody felt. Keep it small. Back at Trident Hall, a recruit who'd been told her whole life to speak louder found that she didn't need to. She learned to drop her ribs and breathe into space. She moved a man off her center with 6mm in surprise. She didn't look to the wall where photos hang. There wasn't one. She looked down at a star, scuffed and stubborn, and understood what it meant to be held by the work of someone she'd never meet. The mark on the mat was never for Aria Vale. It was for the room. It was for the moment you stop arguing with physics and start honoring craft. For the second you choose instruction over impulse, standard over story, respect over noise. For the knowledge that the quietest thing in the gym could be the strongest thing in the fleet. And for the officer who steps wrong, the one who confuses volume with power. It remains a tiny constellation underfoot, a fixed point in a moving sea, whispering the only warning that ever saves a career. Don't be loud, be right.